Family, welcome to another episode of City to City Los Angeles Conversations. I'm joined by one of my favorite thinkers on the West Coast, Pastor Enrique Melendez. Enrique, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Just here, chilling here at the chapel at Biola University, of all places.
Man, what's going on at Biola? What brought you out there?
Well, my kids are at a basketball camp, and so they're trying to work on their game. You know, that little crossover, that shot, trying to make them ready, get them ready, baby.
I like it. So while I have you, I want to honor your time. Before we started our video today, we were talking a little bit about the book of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. And I just wanted to really give you space to share how we can be encouraged by a gospel-centered perspective on the book of Daniel, man. So we'd love to just hear what's on your heart and how you can encourage us in the gospel.
Yeah, well, I recently was looking at the life of Daniel, and I think Daniel is a guy who I think can relate a lot to the Black experience in America. He was a man who was kidnapped from his country. His parents probably killed, and he was made to take on the culture of the Babylonians. And he had to decide how to negotiate that experience, how to operate in that tension. Should he kind of come up and just take advantage of all the privilege? As you know, he was a guy who was educated, best universities in Babylon, 3 years, showered with all the royal meals. He was a specimen, he was special. And so he could have just said, you know what, I'm out here, let me just come up. Or he could have gone a little Malcolm X on him and said, you know what, forget these people. You know what I'm saying? They kill my family. I don't know. I imagine he might have even been castrated. I mean, I think, in Esther, whenever you're around the royal court within the book of Esther, all the people that are around the royal court had to be castrated, especially if you're around the queen. And so, I don't know, Daniel had it rough. And so he had to say, am I Malcolm X or am I going to just climb this ladder? And he had to negotiate that tension internally. So his identity, I think, was really in question at some point. He had to kind of wrestle with what is he was going to embrace about this new culture. And he kind of ends up in this really unique circumstance. So Nebuchadnezzar is just a fool, and he's a guy who loves power, and he builds this 90-foot statue, even though Daniel had told him that statue symbolized the empire that was going to eventually come down by this invisible hand, and the rock was going to hit it, and it was going to come crashing down. Despite that, he decides to build the statue, and he makes everybody bow down. Certainly, you can worship your own God, but you must bow down when the lyre plays, when the cymbals start crashing, when the music starts playing. Bow the knee. And Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, particularly those three guys, they refused. Daniel refused the food in Daniel chapter 1. They're like, we're not down with that. And then these guys, and it's a little bit like peso or pluma, which in Spanish is like...
Yeah, help me out on that one.
Yeah, peso
help me out.
Peso or pluma means either you bow and you get benefits of Babylon, peso, you get hooked up. It's what the drug traffickers tell people who they want to cooperate with them. It's like, you want peso, you want get paid, or do you want pluma? Peso pluma is like, am I saying that wrong? Peso. Now you got me all confused, brother. Anyways, do you want lead? Or do you want cash?
Yeah.
Do you want the lead from this gun, or do you want to get paid? And it was sort of like that situation for Daniel.
Yeah.
You bow down and you get the benefits of all the kingdom. You're living in a pluralistic society. You can do whatever you want. You just need to bow the knee when music starts playing. Or do you deny and you get led? You get killed. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego decided, I'm not doing that. Daniel did it in chapter 1. And now these three counterparts are doing the same. And it's a really dramatic story. And eventually you see them confronted by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, you going to bow down or what? And they say, even if my God doesn't come through, my God can deliver me from this, but even if he doesn't, I'm not bowing the knee. Uh, and so he gets so enraged. How can you defy me? He kind of turns up the heat 7 times. Even the guys who are throwing him in, of course, you know the story, they're dying because it's so hot. And when they get tossed in, they don't even come out smelling like barbecue, not like s'mores, nothing. They just smelling, they smell, you know, top notch, Tide. Just what is going on? And so as I was reflecting on that, I'm like, God, why did you have to do it that way? Why did you have to save them that way? I mean, God could have caused the rain to come down, right? God could have killed the guards before they got tossed in. God could have struck Nebuchadnezzar down. God could have made the flames not turn on, but the flames were turned on to, you know, 700 degrees, and they were thrown in the fire. He didn't save them that way. They were in the fire. And then actually a fourth man appears in the fire. Nebuchadnezzar's tripping, calls them to come out. Hey guys, come out. What's going on? So they finally come out, and he takes the knee. Nebuchadnezzar bows down and says, your God is amazing. Oh my God, it's incredible. But what I was tripping out in that passage is I find myself often, particularly as a dad, sometimes like Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, you going to
Yeah.
defy me? Or sometimes in a situation where someone undermines my leadership or doesn't respect me. And I think in my community, respect's a big deal. Oh, you're not going to
Hmm.
respect me. And you can feel like so irate. And here you have this guy who's totally into power, and I can identify with him. I've had those Nebuchadnezzar spirits in me, and he doesn't get struck down. Instead, it's the 3 guys who are innocent who are put in the fire, and God meets them there. And so I was just particularly struck, one, that um, they don't that Nebuchadnezzar doesn't die. That he's sort of afforded grace,
Yeah.
and these 3 guys are Christ figures because Christ, of course, takes on their what should have been his wrath. These guys take on his wrath, and God protects them, and then he elevates them. And so I'm like, God, there's no one like you, man. There's just that you protect your people, but that doesn't mean that you won't suffer because they were in the fire. So there's lots to think about in that passage. But then also the grace given over to Nebuchadnezzar to kind of be able to see, like, I'll show you real power. And I think ultimately, last thing I'll say, and I know I've been talking a lot, is I think had they not gone through the fire, their view of God would have remained the same. That it was actually in the fire, kind of God could have done it different ways, but because this is the ultimate thing, like, oh, you can't be saved from this situation. It's fire. You're going to burn. He showed them, no, actually, I'm the God that even fire can't consume. That if I want it to happen, I could flip the switch. So I don't know. There's lots there, so we can dialogue
Yeah.
about it. But what are your thoughts as you're hearing me?
Yeah. Man, this is Sunday School 101. But as you think about it, there's so much depth there. The first thought that comes to my mind, Enrique, is as a Christian who engages with culture, I think there's always a pressure to assimilate. Like there's always a pressure to grab hold of what the world around you is doing that is kind of opposite of the ways and the will of God. And, the story you lifted up in the book of Daniel is a great example of that. And I think we see it all throughout the life of Israel in the Old Testament that there is pressure for them to participate in idol worship or, a lifestyle that's just contrary to what God had given them to do. And I think that we have to wrestle with that in our daily lives, right? As planters, as pastors, as ministry leaders, just as regular people trying to walk with God. Like, how do I stay committed and consistent in the things and the ways of God without capitulating to what is happening in culture around me, right? And that
Mhm.
you could bring up any one issue, whether that's like sexuality, or how people identify in this era, or what goes on with money. It's like, do I do it God's way or do I do it man's way? And as you're talking about this tension between Nebuchadnezzar and how Daniel and how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego handled it, I think of Augustine. He has a book called The City of God. I don't know if you read his book, The City of God, before, and
I've
how it
heard it,
just
read it.
it compares really the way, the city of man, the way that man does things, which is like, I'm going to get power, I'm going to pursue influence, I'm going to you know get what I want by any means necessary. And that God's city, or God's way of doing things, is by serving, and like really like giving yourself away for others, even almost sometimes when they don't deserve it. And I just see that Nebuchadnezzar was trying to get them to bow, right? And at the end, he finds himself bowing. But you said it, it's not him being killed at the end, but it's him. Even though we know how the story goes, there's an opportunity for him to be embraced by God. And I wonder if we had that gracious attitude with people that we engaged with, who didn't live like us, who didn't agree with us theologically, or even culturally. If it was like, hey, I'm not here to step on you, I'm not here when you realize your ways maybe have led you down a negative path. I'm not here to point fingers at you, but there's an opportunity for you, as life and the pressures of it has maybe made you bow, right? For me to show you the love and the grace, um, and the redemption and the reconciliation that comes with Jesus, man. There's just so much there that I didn't even see, man. But as you were unpacking it, I'm like, I feel like God gives us the opportunity to choose Him in the face of assimilation, right? Where
Mhm.
we can reach for the wrong things. It's like, man, stay focused, even when you feel that fire. But when seasons change, when things change, remember that you don't need to step on others who maybe potentially want to step on you,
Mm.
but man, to love on them as they maybe experience challenging seasons. So I don't know. That's where my mind led me, man. What are you thinking?
I love what you're saying, and I think that even if you get stepped on, I think what that story shares is that there's a covering from God, a lifting
Yeah,
up, uh, and God sees you, and I think you can trust Him. I think you know that's a very scary thing to do. Thinking about the martyrs of the world, even today, and kind of stepping into like, hey, I'm about God, even in a context that doesn't embrace my faith. I just think that's so courageous. And I think where people get the courage to do something like that is to fall in love with God, to know who He is, to experience Him in their small fires, so that when the big fires come, I think they have a sense of like, no, God is faithful. I've seen Him. I have a relationship with Him. I have an experience. I just don't know about Him. I actually have seen this in my life. Um, their testimonies can save them. So I think um, that's really encouraging. At the other extreme on the other side is there's a couple of Christians out there that say, I'm never going to participate in Babylon. Right? Whereas you see Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were leaders in the marketplace or in politics, or they were leaders in Babylon. They were
yeah.
blessing Babylon. They were engaged in Babylon. And I just think it takes wisdom. Um, and I don't think it's moral to use wisdom as a scapegoat for a lack of courage when that's required. But I think we do need wisdom to know, when is it that I need to stand for what I believe, and when is it that I kind of participate in the good, the common good of everyone else. And yeah, I think obviously worshiping of God, when God becomes secondary, or third or fourth or fifth, I think is when we start to run into trouble. So, anyways, those are some thoughts that come to my mind.
No, that's good, man. I'm thinking about how do we deal with power as Christians and culture? Do we engage with it? Do we reject the culture? Do we fight the culture? Right, which is what a lot of our work with City to City is about: is equipping people to figure how they want to contextualize and participate in what's going on in the world around them. I'm reminded of Judges, the ninth chapter, with Abimelech. and he's leading the nation in a negative direction. And there's a gentleman, I may pronounce his name wrong, but Gal, I believe is his name, that does this uprising, and he's trying to reject and go up against so harsh what's happening around him. And he really ends up ultimately losing his life through that rebellion. But there's a prophetic voice that arises that instead of fighting against the power, shows up and speaks truth to power. And I
Mm,
think that one of the opportunities that's there for us just in the midst of challenging seasons is not to reject, is not to run away, but it's to be a godly example, right? Stand on your principles, but then also speak truth to power and say, hey, I'm not leaving, I'm not running, but I will tell you this is what God stands for. I'm going to
mm,
be here as a reminder that these are the biblical principles that I choose to live by, and I believe that God would have us live by, where we can coexist, but I'm not going to participate in the craziness, or to be more frank, the sin. And I'll also represent the truth that needs to be spoken to power, man. And I think just in this election season, and just the different things that happen in our communities, that as Christians, to bring it back to the scripture that you spoke about, we can say, hey, I won't bow, right? And that may bring pressure, that may bring me some fire, but I believe there will be a fourth man in the fire. But nowhere in Daniel do we see that they run from where they are. So they say,
mhm.
we won't bow, but we're still going to show up. And we may
Yeah.
show up and do things our way, but you're going to see us tomorrow. And one day you'll see that we're right. But until then, we'll be right here. And we believe, like the fourth man in the fire, God will be with us. I want to ask you this, Enrique. There are pastors watching this, planters, future planters, emerging leaders in the faith watching this, as we face situations that maybe challenge us to want to bow, as we try to figure how do we participate in culture and some of the powers in our communities, in our cities, even in our life. How can we preach the gospel to ourselves in those moments? What are some of the things that we should be saying to ourselves, reminding ourselves about the Lord, and just where we stand with him in the midst of all of that? Could you help us with that as we prepare to close our time?
Well, I think a couple of thoughts come to my mind. There is a fear that I personally have experienced, and I think many others are experiencing, whether it's because um, there, I don't have power, I'm going to be left out, I'm not seen. I think that can happen culturally, or that can happen in your leadership circles. Am I seen? Am I acknowledged? Am I respected? And I think that the pursuit of that is fool's gold. Um, and I think that there's a lot of squabbling. Now, I think some of the squabbling is right with respect to like speaking truth to power in terms of like, hey, this is unjust. Hey, let me care for this person, this people group, that people group, that people group. But I think ultimately, um, I need to be faithful to being prophetic, like you said. I need to be faithful to the lane God's called me to kind of live in. And when I've done both of those things as best to my ability, engaged in Babylon, blessed Babylon, but also kind of stake my ground, be prophetic, I just need to trust that God's going to handle the rest with respect to power. In Daniel chapter 2, he says that the invisible hand comes and he tosses a huge rock from the side of a mountain, and the structure, the statue of Babylon comes crumbling down. I think that should give all people who particularly are victims or suffering, or who decide to take on the beatitude of blessed are the meek, nice guys finish last. If you kind of take on that philosophy, that doesn't mean that you're not prophetic or you speak truth. That's why I don't like the nice guy kind of idiom, because I feel like you need to speak to power. And so you need to be faithful to that, courageous to that. But once you've done that and you're a contributor, I think you can rest in the hope that all tyrants, all statues, all powers will break down one day, and he will raise up those who decided to go the way of the meek, the way of Jesus. the way of the prophets who say, I'm going to be speaking truth, but I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to incorporate you into my life. I'm still going to bless you. And that's a very challenging thing to do. It requires a lot of character, which only comes, I think, from regular experiences of God demonstrating that love to you, because you need to realize we all have the spirit of Nebuchadnezzar in us, and yet God was faithful, yet God was patient, as we were practicing our own little uh, kingdoms in different spheres. So, some thoughts that come to my mind.
That's good, man. Be a contributor, be courageous, and then we have to be refueled to practice the ways of Christ. That's good stuff.
Yeah,
Hey, I really appreciate you taking some time, man, just to share with us, to kind of pour into us. This is really what we call Enrique Gospel Community, where we come together and just unpack the scriptures together so we can be centered in the gospel. I want to
right.
say to everyone who decided to take out time in your kitchen, on your couch, in your car, wherever you're watching this, thank you for being with us today. And we'll have some more content like this coming to you soon. Have a good one and God
Appreciate you.
bless.
Bye.